When high school physics teacher Ryland Grace awakens alone aboard a spacecraft hurtling through the void, he faces the ultimate scientific mystery. Microscopic alien organisms are systematically hunting and killing stars across the galaxy, including our own sun. Earth has perhaps 30 years before these cosmic predators drain our star's energy completely, plunging humanity into eternal winter. Grace finds himself cast as an unlikely hero in the greatest hunt in galactic history. His mission leads him to Taeti, the only star that has somehow escaped this stellar plague, where he encounters an alien scientist on an identical, desperate quest to save their own dying world. Despite having evolved under different stars with no shared language or culture, these two minds discover that science itself provides a universal foundation for communication and collaboration. Together, they become the hunters pursuing the most elusive prey imaginable, the biological secrets hidden within stellar plasma that could save both their civilizations. Racing against impossible timelines and cosmic-scale challenges, they must track down microscopic defenders that exist in environments where temperatures reach hundreds of thousands of degrees and radiation levels would sterilize any known life form instantly. The Star Hunters transform scientific investigation into high-stakes adventure where friendship transcends species boundaries and the fate of entire worlds depends on solving the universe's most dangerous biological puzzle before time runs out. Chapter 1. Awakening in Darkness. The first thing I notice is the smell. It's wrong, sterile and metallic, like the inside of a laboratory mixed with something else I can't quite identify. My eyes flutter open, and immediately I'm hit with a wave of disorientation so intense that I have to squeeze them shut again. The world feels like it's spinning, or maybe am spinning. I can't tell which. I try to move, but my limbs feel heavy, unresponsive, as if I've been sleeping for months. Have I been sleeping for months? The thought drifts through my mind like a half-remembered dream, neither fully forming nor disappearing entirely. I attempt to sit up, and my muscles scream in protest, sending sharp pain shooting through my back and shoulders. "What the hell?" I whisper, and even my voice sounds wrong, hoarse and dry like I haven't used it in forever. Forcing my eyes open again, I'm greeted by a ceiling that definitely doesn't belong to any bedroom I've ever seen. It's curved, metallic, with panels and what look like ventilation grills built into it. Soft blue light emanates from strips along the edges, casting everything in an eerie underwater glow. The light hurts my eyes, and I have to blink several times before I can focus properly. I'm lying on some kind of bed or table, but it's not like any hospital bed I've ever seen. The surface beneath me feels firm but slightly yielding, and there are straps across my chest and legs that have apparently been loosened or removed. My hands shake as I reach up to touch my face, and am surprised to find stubble there, more than a few days' worth, but not quite a full beard. How long have I been unconscious? The question echoes in my mind, but I can't find an answer. In fact, as I try to think back, I'm disturbed to realize that I can't remember anything clearly. There are fragments, images and sensations that feel important but slip away when I try to grasp them. A classroom, maybe? Students looking at me expectantly? The memory is there and gone so quickly I'm not sure if it was real or just my imagination. I manage to sit up, though the effort leaves me dizzy and nauseous. The room I'm in is small and cramped, with the same curved walls and ceiling as above. Everything has a utilitarian, high-tech appearance that reminds me of spacecraft I've seen in movies, though that's ridiculous, isn't it? As my vision clears, I notice other beds like mine arranged in a row, 3 of them, including the one I'm on. My heart rate accelerates as I realize that the other 2 beds are occupied. "Hey!" I call out, my voice cracking. "Hey, are you awake?" No response. The figures on the other beds lie perfectly still, and as I look more closely, a cold dread begins to settle in my stomach. Something about their posture, their absolute stillness, tells me they're not just sleeping. I swing my legs over the side of my bed and my feet touch a cold metal floor. My legs feel like jelly, but I force myself to stand, gripping the edge of the bed for support. Each step toward the nearest occupied bed feels like a monumental effort, but I have to know. The person on the bed is a woman, probably in her 40s, with short dark hair and olive skin. She's wearing the same kind of simple functional clothing that I am, a gray jumpsuit that looks like it might be a uniform of some kind. Her eyes are closed, her face peaceful, but when I reach out with a trembling hand to check for a pulse at her neck, her skin is cold to the touch, too cold. No, 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 I whisper, but I already know. I check anyway, pressing my fingers against her throat, her wrist, anywhere I might find a heartbeat. Nothing. She's been dead for a while, long enough for her body temperature to drop significantly. My hands are shaking violently now as I move to the third bed. This one holds a man younger than the woman with blonde hair and pale skin. I don't need to check his pulse to know he's dead too, but I do it anyway, hoping against hope that I'm wrong. I'm not. I'm alone. Completely alone with two corpses in what appears to be some kind of spacecraft or research facility. The reality of the situation hits me like a physical blow, and I have to grab the nearest wall to keep from falling. Think, I tell myself aloud, surprised by how much steadier my voice sounds when I'm not whispering. Think, what do you remember? But that's the problem. I don't remember anything useful. I can recall facts. I know that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that the Earth orbits the sun, that photosynthesis converts carbon dioxide and water into glucose using sunlight. Scientific facts seem to be intact in my memory, but personal details, recent events, how I got here, all of that is a blank. I know my name is Ryland Grace. I know him. How old am I? Probably somewhere in my 30s or 40s, judging by the state of my body and the gray I can see in my hair when I catch my reflection in a polished surface. I know I'm a teacher, or at least I think I am. The classroom memory keeps trying to surface, but it's frustratingly vague. I examine the room more carefully, looking for clues. The walls are lined with equipment that looks incredibly advanced. Screens, control panels, things I can't identify but that seem important. Some of the screens are active, displaying what look like readouts and data, but the information might as well be in a foreign language for all the sense it makes to me. One screen catches my attention because it's displaying what appears to be a star field. Points of light scattered across a black background, with some kind of overlay showing trajectories or calculations. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time because it suggests that I'm not just in some underground laboratory, I'm in space, actually in space. The thought should be impossible, but as I look around the room again, everything makes sense from that perspective. The curved walls, the utilitarian design, the compact efficiency of every fixture and surface. This is a spacecraft and I'm on it millions of miles from Earth. But why? And why are my companions dead while I'm alive? I start opening compartments and drawers, searching for anything that might give me answers. Most of what I find is technical equipment that I can't identify, but in one drawer I discover what appears to be a tablet computer. When I touch the screen, it lights up, and I'm relieved to see that the interface is in English. The first thing I see is a file labeled Mission Overview. My heart pounds as I tap on it, hoping for answers. The document that opens is dense with technical jargon and diagrams, but certain phrases jump out at me. Extinction level event, final mission, Project Hail Mary, Project Hail Mary. Something about that name sends a chill down my spine, as if I should know what it means, and maybe I do, somewhere in the locked rooms of my memory. I scroll through the document trying to make sense of it. There are references to something called astrophage, to stellar dimming, to a countdown that's already been running for years. The more I read, the more a terrible understanding begins to dawn on me. This isn't just any mission. This is a last-ditch effort to save humanity from something that's threatening the entire planet, and somehow I'm the only one left to complete it. The tablet slips from my numb fingers and clatters to the floor. I sink down onto the nearest bed, my mind reeling. I'm on a spacecraft, alone except for two dead companions, on a mission to save the world. And I can't remember any of it. As I sit there in the blue-tinged darkness, surrounded by the soft hum of life support systems and the vast emptiness of space, one thought echoes through my mind with crystal clarity. I have to figure out what I'm supposed to do, and I have to do it fast. Because if I don't, everyone I've ever known, everyone I've ever loved, everyone on earth is going to die. The weight of that responsibility settles on my shoulders like a lead blanket. But underneath the fear and confusion, I feel something else stirring, a sense of purpose, maybe even determination. I'm a teacher. I remember that much. Teachers solve problems. They figure things out. They find ways to help people learn and grow and succeed. I just need to figure out what lesson I'm supposed to teach and who I'm supposed to teach it to. I pick up the tablet again and continue reading. There's work to do. Chapter 2, Fragments of Memory. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I wake up slumped over the tablet with a crick in my neck and drool on my chin. The soft blue lighting hasn't changed, and there's no way to tell if it's day or night. Not that those concepts have much meaning when you're floating through the vacuum of space. The thought still sends a shiver down my spine. My dreams were vivid and strange, filled with fragments that felt more like memories trying to surface than actual dreams. A classroom filled with teenagers who looked bored out of their minds. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair calling my name. "Ryland, you need to see this." A laboratory filled with equipment I almost recognize. And strangest of all, the image of tiny lights moving through water, beautiful and somehow terrifying at the same time. I stretch my aching muscles and pick up the tablet again. The mission overview document is still open, and in the harsh light of whatever passes for morning in space, I force myself to read it more carefully. The technical jargon is dense, but my scientific background helps me parse most of it. The document talks about something called the astrophage crisis. Apparently, microscopic organisms from space have infected our sun and are slowly draining its energy. The word astrophage literally means star eater, which is about as ominous as scientific terminology gets. According to the projections, our sun will dim by enough to cause a catastrophic drop in Earth's temperature within 30 years. Not enough to kill the sun entirely, but enough to trigger an ice age that would wipe out most life on the planet. I lean back against the wall trying to process this information. It sounds like science fiction, but the data presented here looks legitimate. Spectral analysis of the sun shows specific absorption lines that match no known element. Solar output measurements show a gradual but consistent decline. Mathematical models predict cascading climate effects that would make Earth uninhabitable for most species. Jesus, I whispered to the empty room. An extinction event, not from an asteroid or a supervolcano, but from microscopic aliens eating our star from the inside out. But then something in the document catches my attention, a glimmer of hope in the cosmic horror story. There's a section titled Tau Ceti Exception. Apparently, out of all the stars being monitored, Tau Ceti is the only one that shows no signs of astrophage infection. 12 light-years away, there's a star system that somehow resisted these cosmic parasites. And that's where I'm going. That's why I'm here, alone in this tin can, hurtling through space at speeds that would have been impossible just a few decades ago. I'm supposed to figure out why Tau Ceti is different and bring that knowledge back to Earth. The weight of responsibility crashes over me again, but this time it's accompanied by something else. A flash of memory so vivid it makes me gasp. I'm standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations, explaining stellar fusion to a classroom full of high school students. Most of them look like they'd rather be anywhere else, but a few are actually paying attention. There's a girl in the front row, Sandra, who asks intelligent questions that show she really understands the concepts. The sun, I'm saying in the memory, produces energy by fusing hydrogen atoms into helium. This process releases enormous amounts of energy in the form of light and heat. Without it, Earth would be a frozen rock floating in space. The memory fades, but it leaves behind a sense of identity that I've been missing. I'm a teacher. More specifically, I'm a science teacher who specializes in physics and astronomy. That's why I remember scientific facts so clearly while personal details remain frustratingly vague. My professional knowledge is deeply ingrained, automatic, while autobiographical memories are somehow harder to access. I explore the spacecraft more thoroughly, looking for additional clues about my identity and mission. The vessel is larger than I initially thought, with multiple compartments connected by narrow corridors that require me to duck slightly. Everything is designed for maximum efficiency and minimum space, with storage compartments built into every available surface. In what appears to be a combination laboratory and workshop, I find equipment that makes my scientific heart race. Mass spectrometers, electron microscopes, DNA sequencers, and devices I can't immediately identify, but that clearly represent the cutting edge of multiple scientific disciplines. This isn't just a transportation vessel. It's a complete research facility designed to analyze whatever I find at Taeti. A workstation near the center of the lab draws my attention. Multiple screens show data streams, orbital mechanics calculations, and what appears to be a countdown timer. The timer shows numbers that make my blood run cold. 948 days, 14 hours, 27 minutes, and counting down, less than 3 years. That's how long I have to complete this mission and return to Earth with a solution. The countdown assumes everything goes perfectly, that I successfully reach Tau Ceti, figure out why it's immune to astrophage, develop a method to protect our sun, and make the journey home. Any delays, any setbacks, any complications could push the timeline past the point where Earth can still be saved. I sink into the chair at the workstation and try to organize what I know. I'm Ryland Grace, a high school science teacher who somehow got selected for humanity's most important mission. I'm traveling alone toward Tau Ceti to investigate why that star system resists astrophage infection. I have sophisticated equipment to conduct research, but I'm working against a countdown that doesn't allow for mistakes. But there are still enormous gaps in my knowledge. How did I get selected for this mission? What happened to my crewmates? Why am I the only survivor? And perhaps most importantly, do I actually have the skills necessary to solve a problem that apparently stumped the world's best scientists? Another memory surfaces, this one triggered by the sight of the research equipment. I'm in a different laboratory, much larger than the one I'm in now, surrounded by people in white coats. A woman with short brown hair is showing me a sample under a microscope. "Look at this, Grace," she says, and I can hear excitement in her voice. "We've never seen anything like it." I peer into the microscope and see tiny, almost crystalline structures moving through the sample with purpose and coordination. They're beautiful in an alien way, like living jewels that pulse with their own internal light. "What are they?" I ask in the memory. "We're calling them astrophage," she replies. "They're unlike any life form we've ever encountered. They seem to be feeding directly on stellar energy, converting photons into some kind of biological fuel we don't understand yet." The memory includes a flood of technical details that my conscious mind struggles to retain, but the emotional content is clear. I was part of the research team that discovered and studied astrophage. I wasn't just selected for this mission randomly. I was chosen because I helped develop our understanding of these organisms. More memories follow, coming faster now as if a dam has burst in my mind. Meetings with government officials from dozens of countries, debates about resource allocation for Project Hail Mary, arguments about crew selection and mission parameters, the gradual realization that this wasn't just another space mission, but humanity's last hope for survival. I remember the woman with kind eyes now, Dr. Eva Stratt, the project director who somehow convinced every nation on Earth to contribute resources to this desperate gambit. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and absolutely committed to giving humanity a chance to survive. And I remember why I'm alone on this spacecraft. The memory is painful, sharp with loss and guilt. We were supposed to be a 3-person crew, myself as the mission specialist, Commander Yui Tanaka as pilot and engineer, and Dr. Olesia Ilyukina as biologist and backup mission specialist. All 3 of us were selected not just for our expertise, but for our psychological resilience and ability to work together under extreme stress. But the journey to Tau Ceti takes over 4 years each way, even with the advanced propulsion system that Project Hail Mary developed. The human body isn't designed to survive that long in space, even with the best life support systems. So we were put into medically induced comas. Our metabolism slowed to a crawl while automated systems maintained our bodies, and the spacecraft continued its journey. Something went wrong with Yui and Olisia's life support systems. I don't know what the automated logs will tell me, but I haven't been able to bring myself to read them yet. What I do know is that I woke up alone and they didn't wake up at all. The grief hits me like a physical blow. These weren't just my crewmates, they were my friends. I remember shared meals during training, long conversations about the mission, U.S. terrible jokes about space food, Olesia stories about growing up in Siberia. They volunteered for this mission knowing they might never see Earth again, and now they're gone. But their sacrifice means something only if I complete the mission. I'm carrying the hopes and dreams of 3 people now, not just one. The thought is simultaneously crushing and motivating. I wipe my eyes and force myself to focus on the present. The ship's computer indicates that we're still months away from Taeti, which gives me time to prepare. I need to review all the research data, familiarize myself with the equipment, and develop a comprehensive plan for investigating the Tau Ceti system. But first, I need to understand exactly what happened to my crewmates. I owe them that much. I navigate through the ship's computer system until I find the medical logs. The data is dense and technical, but my scientific training helps me interpret the key points. Both Yui and Olesia suffered catastrophic failures in their life support systems. Not equipment malfunctions, but biological complications that the automated systems couldn't correct. The details are complex, involving protein folding disorders and cellular damage that accumulated during the long journey. Essentially, their bodies couldn't handle the stress of prolonged suspended animation. The medical systems tried to compensate, but there are limits to what technology can accomplish. I check my own medical data and find similar warning signs, though apparently not severe enough to be fatal. My body took damage during the journey, but I'm still functional. The question is whether it'll remain functional long enough to complete the mission and make the return journey. Looking at the countdown timer again, I realize that the timeline is even tighter than I initially thought. I need to account for physical degradation, equipment limitations, and the simple fact that I'm now trying to do the work of 3 highly trained specialists. But I also realize something else. The memories that have been returning aren't random. They're specifically related to my work on astrophage and Project Hail Mary. My brain seems to be prioritizing information that's relevant to the mission. Maybe my amnesia isn't just a side effect of the journey. Maybe it's my mind's way of focusing on what's truly important. I pull up the research files on my tablet and begin reading in earnest. If I'm going to save humanity, I need to remember everything I once knew about the tiny organisms that are slowly killing our star. The countdown continues its relentless march towards 0, but for the first time since waking up, I feel like I might actually have a chance to stop it. The memories keep coming, and with them, the knowledge I'll need to complete the most important mission in human history. Chapter 3. The Star Eaters. 3 weeks have passed since I woke up, and I've fallen into a routine that would probably seem bizarre to anyone watching from the outside. I wake up, check the ship systems, eat something that claims to be food but tastes like cardboard, and then spend hours poring over research data about the most dangerous organisms humanity has ever encountered. It's like cramming for the most important final exam in history, except failure doesn't just mean a bad grade. It means the extinction of every person I've ever known. My memories have been returning in waves, sometimes triggered by specific pieces of data, sometimes arriving unbidden in dreams that feel more real than my waking hours. I remember now why I was chosen for this mission, and it wasn't just because of my teaching background. Before I became a high school physics teacher, I had been working on my doctorate in astrophysics, specifically studying stellar composition and energy output. When the astrophage crisis began, that combination of research experience and ability to explain complex concepts made me valuable to the project. Today, I'm finally ready to tackle the core scientific challenge, understanding exactly what astrophage are and how they work. The data files contain years of research from teams across the globe, and I need to synthesize all of that information into a coherent picture that might lead to a solution. I pull up the first detailed analysis conducted by Dr. Locken's team in Norway just 6 months after the initial discovery. The beauty of their methodology strikes me immediately. They approached the problem exactly the way I would teach students to tackle any unknown phenomenon. Start with observations, move to measurements, form hypotheses, and test predictions. The first observation was deceptively simple. Stars were getting dimmer. Not all stars, and not uniformly, but a significant percentage of observable stars showed decreased luminosity over time. The pattern wasn't random either. Stars that were similar to our Sun in size and composition were affected most severely, while larger, hotter stars showed less impact, and smaller, cooler stars seemed largely immune. This observation alone told researchers something crucial about astrophage biology, though they didn't realize it at the time. The organisms weren't just randomly consuming energy. They had preferences, specific requirements that made certain types of stars more suitable hosts than others. Think of it like how some parasites can only survive in particular species of animals. Astrophage had evolved or been designed to thrive in the specific environmental conditions found in sun-like stars. The breakthrough came when Dr. Lawkins' team managed to capture live samples from our sun's corona using an unmanned probe. What they have found defied every assumption about how life could exist and function. Astrophage weren't just heat-resistant. They were thermophilic in the extreme, requiring temperatures of millions of degrees to survive and reproduce. They lived in the sun's corona and upper atmosphere, feeding directly on the nuclear fusion reactions that power our star. I pause in my reading to consider the implications. In my classroom, I used to tell students that extremophiles, organisms that thrive in extreme environments, could teach us about the limits of life. I'd describe bacteria that live in boiling hot springs or archaea that survive in highly acidic conditions. But astrophage represented an entirely new category of extremophile, one that made a home in the most hostile environment imaginable, the interior of a star. The microscopic images in the files are breathtaking. Individual astrophage look like tiny crystals, geometric structures that seem almost artificial in their perfection. They're roughly spherical, about the size of large viruses, but their internal structure is unlike anything in Earth's biosphere. Instead of the carbon-based chemistry that defines all terrestrial life, astrophage appear to use a silicon-based framework that can maintain structural integrity at stellar temperatures. But the most remarkable discovery was how they reproduce. Rather than splitting like bacteria or exchanging genetic material like more complex organisms, astrophage reproduction is tied directly to stellar fusion. They position themselves near fusion reactions, absorb specific types of radiation, and use that energy to create perfect copies of themselves. In essence, they're converting the star's own energy production into biological reproduction, creating an exponential growth curve that's limited only by the available fusion reactions. Dr. Stratt's research notes, which I remember helping to compile, contain the mathematical models that predicted our current crisis. If astrophage reproduction continues unchecked, they'll consume enough of the sun's energy to reduce its output by 30% over the next 26 years. That might not sound catastrophic, but stellar energy drives Earth's entire climate system. A 30% reduction in solar output would trigger an ice age that would make the last glacial period look mild by comparison. Agricultural systems would collapse within a decade. Ocean currents would slow and eventually stop, disrupting weather patterns across the globe. Average global temperatures would drop by 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, making most of the planet uninhabitable for human civilization. The model suggests that up to 90% of Earth's population would die from starvation, exposure, or conflicts over increasingly scarce resources. I have to stop reading for a moment because the emotional weight of these projections threatens to overwhelm me. These aren't abstract numbers, they represent real people. Students I taught, colleagues I worked with, family members whose faces I'm still struggling to remember clearly. The entire human story, 10,000 years of civilization, art, literature, science, and culture, reduced to a few scattered survivors huddling around failing heat sources in a world that no longer supports complex life. But dwelling on the catastrophic scenarios won't help me find a solution. I forced myself to continue reading, focusing on the research that led to Project Hail Mary's development. The key insight came from spectroscopic analysis of multiple star systems. When astronomers examined the light signatures from stars throughout our local galactic neighborhood, they found that astrophage infection wasn't universal. Most stars showed the telltale absorption lines that indicated astrophage presence, but a few systems appeared completely clean. Of these uninfected systems, Tau Ceti stood out as the most accessible target for investigation. Tau Ceti is remarkably similar to our own Sun, slightly smaller and cooler, but with the same basic stellar classification that makes it a prime candidate for astrophage infection. By all rights, it should be crawling with the organisms. The fact that it isn't suggests that something in the Tau Ceti system actively prevents astrophage from establishing a foothold there. The research team developed several hypotheses about what might protect Tau Ceti. Perhaps the system contains naturally occurring chemicals that are toxic to astrophage. Maybe the stellar magnetic field has unusual properties that disrupt their reproduction cycle. It's possible that the system hosts another organism that competes with or preys upon astrophage, keeping their population in check through biological means. Any of these possibilities could lead to a treatment for our Sun, but developing that treatment requires understanding the exact mechanism of protection. That's why I'm here, crossing the vast emptiness between star systems in a spacecraft that represents humanity's greatest technological achievement and our final desperate gamble. I pull up the ship's navigation display and check our progress. We're still 8 months away from Tau Ceti, traveling at nearly 20% of light speed thanks to a fusion drive system that itself represents a minor miracle of engineering. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. We're covering more distance in a single day than humans traveled in their entire history before the space age. Yet even at this incredible velocity, the journey takes years because the universe is so unimaginably vast. During these long months of travel, I need to prepare for every possible scenario I might encounter. The research equipment on board can analyze stellar composition, detect organic compounds, sequence genetic material, and perform thousands of other specialized functions. But all of this technology is useless without a scientist who understands how to use it effectively. I spend hours each day practicing with the instruments, reviewing their operational parameters, and running simulations of various research protocols. The mass spectrometer can identify chemical elements and compounds with extraordinary precision, but only if I collect samples properly and interpret the results correctly. The electron microscope can reveal cellular structures at the molecular level, but the images it produces require extensive knowledge to understand what they're showing. Perhaps most importantly, I'm developing contingency plans for different scenarios. If I find chemical compounds that suppress astrophage, I need protocols for isolating, analyzing, and synthesizing those compounds in quantities sufficient for treating our Sun. If I discover competing organisms, I need methods for capturing live samples, understanding their biology, and potentially cultivating them for transport back to Earth. The more I study the research data, the more I appreciate the enormous scientific challenge ahead of me. Astrophage represent a form of life that's fundamentally alien to anything in Earth's biosphere. They've evolved in an environment where the laws of physics operate at their most extreme, where temperatures reach millions of degrees and radiation levels would instantly destroy any terrestrial organism. Understanding how to combat them requires thinking beyond the boundaries of conventional biology and chemistry. But I also realize that my background as a teacher might be my greatest asset in this endeavor. Teaching science isn't just about knowing facts. It's about understanding how to break down complex problems into manageable components, how to test hypotheses systematically, and how to communicate findings clearly. These skills become crucial when you're trying to solve problems that no one has ever encountered before. Late in the ship's artificial night cycle, I often find myself staring out the small viewport at the starfield ahead. Tau Ceti isn't visible yet. It's still just a point of light indistinguishable from thousands of others, but I know it's there, waiting with answers that could save my species or confirm our doom. The weight of responsibility is crushing, but it's balanced by something else: intellectual curiosity. Despite the dire circumstances, I'm genuinely excited about what I might discover at Tau Ceti. This is science at its purest and most essential, using human intelligence and ingenuity to understand the universe and solve problems that matter. It's why I became a scientist in the first place, and why I tried to inspire that same curiosity in my students. Tomorrow, I'll continue studying the astrophage data, preparing for whatever awaits me in an alien star system. But tonight, I allow myself a moment of wonder at the sheer audacity of what we're attempting. Humanity has built a spacecraft capable of traveling between stars, developed instruments that can analyze life forms that exist in stellar plasma, and sent a single person across the void with the hope of bringing back salvation. It's the greatest scientific expedition in human history, and everything depends on getting it right. Chapter 4: The Desperate Mission. The memories of Project Hail Mary's conception come flooding back to me like pieces of a massive jigsaw puzzle, finally clicking into place. I'm sitting in the ship's tiny observation lounge watching the starfield slowly shift as we hurtle through space at velocities that still boggle my mind. When suddenly I remember the day everything changed. Not the day we discovered astrophage, that was a gradual realization that unfolded over months, but the day we understood that our planet was truly doomed without intervention. I can see Dr. Eva Stratt's face as clearly as if she were sitting across from me now, her expression mixing determination with barely concealed terror. She was standing at the front of a conference room packed with the world's leading scientists, government officials, and military leaders from every major nation. The room itself was remarkable. When had humanity ever managed to get representatives from every country on Earth to agree on anything, let alone work together toward a common goal? "Ladies and gentlemen," she had said, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter that filled the room, "we have exhausted every conventional option. Our models show conclusively that astrophage will reduce solar output below the threshold for maintaining current climate patterns within 26 years. The cascading effects will begin much sooner. Crop failures, ecosystem collapse, and social breakdown will start within a decade." The silence that followed her words was deafening. I remember looking around that room and seeing the same expression on every face, the dawning realization that we were witnessing the potential end of human civilization. Not from nuclear war or asteroid impact or any of the dramatic scenarios that science fiction had prepared us for, but from microscopic organisms slowly draining the life from our star. But Stratt wasn't finished. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, and I remember feeling my heart rate accelerate as I saw what she was proposing. The image showed a spacecraft design unlike anything that had ever been built. A vessel combining technologies from every spacefaring nation, powered by fusion engines that existed only in theoretical physics papers, and designed for a journey that would push the absolute limits of human endurance. "Project Hail Mary," she announced, "represents our final option. We will construct an interstellar research vessel capable of reaching Taeti, the only nearby star system that shows no signs of astrophage infection. Our mission: determine why Taeti remains immune and return with that knowledge in time to save our world." The room erupted into discussion, not the chaotic arguing you might expect, but the focused problem-solving conversation of scientists and engineers who understood both the magnitude of the challenge and the necessity of success. I remember thinking that this was humanity at its best. Faced with extinction, we were choosing to reach across the void between stars and fight for survival using nothing but human intelligence and determination. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable when laid out in detail. Interstellar travel had been the stuff of science fiction just decades earlier, yet here we were planning to build a spacecraft capable of accelerating to 20% of light speed, maintaining life support systems for a journey measured in years, and carrying scientific equipment sophisticated enough to analyze alien biochemistry. The project would require advances in fusion propulsion, materials science, life support technology, and automated systems that represented decades of normal scientific progress compressed into a handful of years. But perhaps the most sobering realization was that this wasn't really a rescue mission. It was a desperate gamble with odds so poor that any rational analysis would recommend against attempting it. The spacecraft would need to function perfectly for over 8 years. The crew would need to survive a journey that pushed human physiology to its limits. Once they reached Tau Ceti, They would need to solve a biological puzzle that had stumped teams of experts working with samples from our own star system. And then they would need to make the return journey with whatever solution they discovered, arriving back at Earth before the point of no return. The more I remember about those planning sessions, the more I appreciate the sheer audacity of what we attempted. Every major government on Earth contributed resources to the project, not just money, but their most advanced technologies, their brightest scientists, and their manufacturing capabilities. Countries that had been adversaries for generations suddenly found themselves working together with unprecedented cooperation, united by the understanding that national boundaries become meaningless when your entire planet is under threat. I remember the crew selection process, which was almost as complex as designing the spacecraft itself. We needed people with multiple scientific specializations who could also function in the isolated, high-stress environment of interstellar travel. Physical health was crucial, but psychological resilience was equally important. The crew would need to work together effectively for years while being completely cut off from Earth, facing challenges that no human had ever encountered before. The psychological evaluation process was exhaustive. They didn't just want scientists. They wanted scientists who could maintain mental stability during a journey that would test every aspect of human endurance. We underwent months of isolation training, stress testing, and simulation exercises designed to identify individuals who would thrive rather than merely survive under extreme conditions. Commander Yui Tanaka was selected for her exceptional engineering skills and her experience with long-duration space missions. She had spent more time in space than almost any human alive, including 18 months aboard the International Space Station during her astronaut career. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of calm, methodical problem-solving approach that would be essential when dealing with equipment failures millions of miles from any possible assistance. Dr. Olesia Ilyukina brought expertise in exobiology and biochemistry that made her invaluable for analyzing whatever we might find at Taeti. Her research on extremophiles had contributed to our initial understanding of how life might exist in environments previously thought uninhabitable. She had also spent years working in Antarctica, which provided experience with isolation and harsh conditions that closely paralleled what we would face in interstellar space. My own selection puzzled me at first. While I had research experience in astrophysics, I was primarily a teacher, not a leading expert in stellar physics or astrobiology. But Strat explained their reasoning in a way that still resonates with me now. "Grace," she said during one of our planning meetings, "this mission isn't just about having the right knowledge, it's about having the ability to learn quickly and adapt to completely new situations. Teaching science requires you to understand concepts deeply enough to explain them clearly, and it develops the kind of flexible thinking we'll need when we encounter phenomena that don't fit our existing theories." She was right about the need for adaptability. As our understanding of astrophage evolved during the mission planning phase, we constantly had to revise our assumptions about what we might find at Tau Ceti. The organisms were unlike anything in Earth's biosphere, which meant that standard biological analysis techniques might not apply. We would need to develop new methodologies, possibly even new theoretical frameworks, for understanding alien biochemistry. The spacecraft construction itself represented the largest international cooperation project in human history. The fusion engines were based on designs developed by teams in Japan and Germany, using materials created in specialized facilities across 12 different countries. The life support systems incorporated technologies from the Russian space program, NASA, the European Space Agency, and private aerospace companies that had never worked together before. The scientific equipment bay contained instruments contributed by research institutions from every continent. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the project was the timeline. Under normal circumstances, developing and testing the technologies required for Project Hail Mary would take decades. We had less than 4 years to design, build, test, and launch a spacecraft more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. This was only possible because every participating nation committed resources at wartime levels, treating the project as a matter of species survival rather than normal scientific exploration. I remember the debates about mission architecture that consumed weeks of planning meetings. Should we send multiple smaller spacecraft to improve our chances of success? Should we focus on a larger crew with more redundancy? Should we prioritize speed to reduce travel time or reliability to improve survival odds? Every decision involved trade-offs that could determine whether humanity survived or perished. The final design reflected a careful balance of these competing priorities. A single spacecraft would carry 3 crew members, each cross-trained in multiple specializations to provide redundancy without excessive weight. The journey would take just over 4 years each way, representing the fastest transit time possible with our fusion propulsion technology while still maintaining adequate safety margins. The scientific equipment would be comprehensive enough to analyze whatever we found, but compact enough to leave room for samples and data storage for the return journey. The launch timeline was equally critical. Astrophage reproduction rates meant that we had a narrow window for mission success. Leave too early and we might not understand enough about the organisms to know what to look for. Leave too late and the damage to our sun would become irreversible before we could return with a solution. The mathematical models showed that we needed to launch within 18 months of the decision to proceed and return with actionable results within 10 years total. As I sit here now remembering those desperate planning sessions, I'm struck by the realization that every person involved in Project Hail Mary knew they were participating in humanity's last hope. The scientists working 18-hour days to solve technological problems, the engineers pushing the boundaries of material science, the government officials coordinating unprecedented international cooperation, all of them understood that failure meant the end of human civilization. Yet, despite the overwhelming pressure and seemingly impossible odds, there was something remarkable about the project's atmosphere. Rather than despair or panic, there was a sense of purpose and determination that I had never experienced before. We were facing the greatest challenge in human history, and we were choosing to meet it with science, cooperation, and an audacious plan that represented everything noble about human nature. The memory of that collective determination sustains me now as I continue my solitary journey toward Taeti. I'm carrying the hopes and efforts of millions of people who work to make this mission possible. Every day I spend preparing for what awaits me at our destination honors their sacrifice and commitment. Tomorrow, I'll review the final mission protocols and begin detailed preparations for our arrival at Taeti. But tonight, I remember the moment when humanity chose to reach for the stars rather than surrender to extinction. It was our finest hour, and I'm honored to be the one carrying that legacy across the darkness between worlds. Chapter 5, An Unexpected Ally. The proximity alarm starts screaming at 0347 ship time, jolting me from the deepest sleep I've had in weeks. For a moment, I'm completely disoriented, my heart hammering as I try to remember where I am and why mechanical voices are shouting warnings in multiple languages. Then reality crashes back. I'm alone on a spacecraft approaching Taeti, and something has triggered the collision detection system. I scramble out of my sleeping alcove and rush to the main control station, my bare feet slipping on the cold metal floor. The primary display shows a 3-dimensional representation of local space, and there, highlighted in angry red, is an object that definitely shouldn't be there. It's roughly the same size as my own vessel, maybe 100 meters away and closing slowly. The computer identifies it as artificial, not an asteroid or debris, but a constructed object with clear geometric patterns and what appear to be propulsion systems. My first thought is that this must be some kind of equipment left behind by previous human missions, but that's impossible. No human spacecraft has ever traveled to Taeti before. This is humanity's first interstellar journey, and I'm supposed to be completely alone out here. Yet the evidence is right in front of me. Another vessel, clearly designed and built by intelligent beings, sharing this tiny pocket of space around an alien star. The implications hit me like a physical blow. I'm not alone in the universe. Somewhere out there, another species has developed technology sophisticated enough for interstellar travel, and they've come to the same place I have for reasons I can't begin to guess. The discovery that would normally represent the greatest moment in human history suddenly feels terrifying when you're millions of miles from home with no way to call for help. I force myself to think systematically the way I would approach any scientific problem. First, gather data. The sensor array provides detailed scans of the alien vessel, and what I see is both fascinating and reassuring. The ship's design follows principles that make sense from an engineering perspective, streamlined for efficient space travel, with what appear to be fusion engines similar to my own, and modular construction that suggests practical rather than aggressive purposes. This looks like a research vessel, not a warship. The materials analysis reveals something even more interesting. The hull appears to be composed of metallic alloys that are significantly different from anything in human technology, but the underlying principles are familiar. Whoever built this ship understands material science, thermodynamics, and propulsion physics in ways that parallel human knowledge. They've solved the same basic problems of interstellar travel that Project Hail Mary addressed, just using different approaches and technologies. More importantly, the vessel's trajectory and positioning suggest that its occupants are here for scientific purposes rather than territorial expansion or resource extraction. The ship is positioned to conduct detailed observations of the Taeti system, particularly the star itself. Its instruments are pointed toward the stellar corona and inner planets, exactly where you would focus if you were trying to understand why this star system remains free of astrophage infection. The realization hits me with stunning clarity. They're here for the same reason I am. Somehow, somewhere else in the galaxy, another intelligent species has encountered the astrophage threat and traced it back to this system looking for answers. We're not just sharing space around Tau Ceti, we're sharing the same desperate mission to save our respective worlds from extinction. This understanding transforms my initial fear into something much more complex. On one hand, the presence of another species facing the same crisis suggests that astrophage represents a galactic-scale threat rather than something specific to our solar system. That's terrifying in its implications. How many civilizations across the galaxy are facing the same countdown to extinction that Earth confronts? On the other hand, I'm no longer alone in trying to solve this problem. Somewhere on that alien vessel, beings with intelligence and scientific knowledge are working toward the same goal I am. The question becomes how to establish communication with creatures who evolved on a completely different world, probably under conditions unlike anything on Earth. Human language, mathematics, even basic concepts of time and space might be meaningless to minds that develop through entirely different evolutionary pressures. Yet we share something fundamental. We're both here because we understand scientific principles well enough to build interstellar spacecraft and recognize the threat that astrophage represents. I spend hours studying the alien vessel's behavior, looking for patterns that might indicate intelligence and peaceful intentions. The ship maintains a stable distance from mine, neither approaching aggressively nor retreating. Its sensor arrays are active, clearly scanning both my vessel and the local space environment, but it makes no hostile moves. Most tellingly, it's directing significant attention toward the same astronomical phenomena I came here to study. The breakthrough comes when I realize that the alien ship is conducting systematic spectroscopic analysis of Tau Cetus corona, following a methodical pattern that any scientist would recognize. They're mapping the star's atmospheric composition layer by layer, exactly the kind of detailed survey that would be necessary to understand why astrophage can't establish itself here. This isn't random exploration, it's sophisticated scientific investigation following principles that transcend species boundaries. Mathematics becomes my first attempt at communication. Mathematical relationships exist independently of biological evolution or cultural development. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter is the same whether you're human, alien, or any other form of intelligence capable of understanding geometry. I begin transmitting simple mathematical sequences, prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, basic geometric relationships, using radio frequencies that should be detectable by any advanced civilization. The response comes faster than I dared hope. Within hours, the alien vessel begins transmitting its own mathematical sequences, starting with my own patterns to acknowledge receipt, then extending them in ways that demonstrate not just understanding but mathematical sophistication. They send increasingly complex number sequences, geometric proofs, and what appear to be physical constants expressed in universal terms. Most remarkably, they begin transmitting what I recognize as spectroscopic data about Taeti, formatted in ways that make the information accessible despite our completely different technological approaches. This exchange represents the first interstellar conversation in the history of two species, conducted in the universal language of mathematics and science. Through careful iteration and mutual patience, we establish basic communication protocols. I learned to recognize their number system, their methods for expressing physical measurements, and their approaches to organizing scientific data. They demonstrate similar adaptability in understanding human mathematical conventions and scientific notation. The alien intelligence I'm communicating with shows remarkable patience and systematic thinking. They don't rush the communication process or attempt to convey complex concepts before establishing firm foundations. Instead, they methodically build understanding one concept at a time, always ensuring mutual comprehension before introducing new ideas. This approach reveals something profound about their nature, their natural teachers and learners, approaching our communication challenge with the same methodical precision they apply to their scientific research. As our mathematical dialogue develops, I begin to understand more about their mission and capabilities. They've been studying the Tau Ceti system for significantly longer than I have. Their data archives contain observations spanning what appears to be several months. Their instrumental capabilities are impressive, particularly in areas where their technology surpasses human achievements. They can analyze stellar atmospheric composition with greater precision than my equipment allows, and their understanding of certain physical phenomena exceeds current human knowledge. But I also discover that my equipment has capabilities theirs lacks. Human technology excels in areas where their approaches are less developed, particularly in biological analysis and genetic sequencing techniques. We've developed different solutions to the same fundamental problems of interstellar science, creating complementary rather than identical capabilities. Together, we might be able to conduct research that neither of us could accomplish alone. The most profound moment comes when I realize that despite evolving on different worlds under different stars, facing challenges that shape completely different forms of life, we share something essential. We both chose to respond to an existential threat by reaching across the vast emptiness between stars to seek knowledge that might save our species. We both committed enormous resources to scientific exploration rather than warfare or conquest. We both possess the intellectual courage to risk everything on the hope that understanding the universe more completely might provide solutions to seemingly impossible problems. This commonality suggests something remarkable about intelligence itself. Perhaps the development of scientific thinking and the willingness to explore the unknown aren't accidents of human evolution, but fundamental characteristics of any intelligence capable of understanding its place in the universe. The fact that two completely different species independently chose the path of exploration and cooperation, rather than despair or aggression, hints at universal principles that transcend biological origins. As I prepare for my first direct contact with an alien intelligence, I am struck by the irony of my situation. I came to Tau Ceti expecting to study stellar physics and biochemistry, but I've stumbled into something far more significant: the discovery that intelligence, curiosity, and hope aren't uniquely human traits. The universe has produced at least two species willing to risk everything to preserve life and understanding, and now we have the opportunity to combine our knowledge and capabilities in ways that might save both our worlds. The mathematical dialogue continues through the ship's night cycle, each exchange building our mutual understanding and preparing us for the more complex communication that lies ahead. Tomorrow, I'll attempt to establish more sophisticated contact protocols and begin sharing detailed scientific data about astrophage and our respective missions. But tonight, for the first time since waking up alone among the stars, I don't feel the crushing weight of solitary responsibility. I have a partner in this desperate mission, an ally whose intelligence and dedication match my own. Together, we might just have a chance to solve the greatest challenge either of our species has ever faced. Chapter 6: The Language of Science. The breakthrough in communication happens in the most unexpected way. I'm working through what I think is a complex mathematical proof the alien has transmitted when I realize they're not showing me abstract mathematics at all. They're teaching me their language by using physics as a translation key. It starts with something beautifully simple. The alien transmits the number 3.14159, which I immediately recognize as pi. But then they follow it with a sequence that initially looks like random numbers, 6.28318. It takes me several minutes to realize this is 2 times pi, the circumference of a unit circle. Then comes 471238, which is 3 halves times pi, and suddenly I understand what they're doing. They're not just demonstrating mathematical knowledge, they're establishing a linguistic framework where mathematical relationships serve as the foundation for more complex communication. Think about how elegant this approach is from a teaching perspective. When you're trying to explain a difficult concept to students who speak different languages, you start with things everyone can see and understand: physical demonstrations, visual relationships, concrete examples that don't depend on cultural knowledge. The alien intelligence has taken this principle and elevated it to interspecies communication by using the universal language of physics as their translation tool. Over the next several hours, we develop what I can only describe as a pigeon language based on scientific principles. They establish symbols for basic physical constants: the speed of light, Planck's constant, the gravitational constant, and then use these as building blocks for more complex ideas. When they want to express the concept of time, they reference the frequency of atomic transitions. When they need to describe distance, they use wavelengths of specific electromagnetic radiation. Every noun, verb, and adjective in our developing vocabulary derives from measurable physical phenomena. The genius of this approach becomes clear when I realize that any intelligent species capable of interstellar travel must understand the same fundamental physics that governs our universe. The speed of light is the same whether you evolved on Earth or in some distant star system. Atomic structure follows identical principles regardless of which planet you call home. By grounding our language in these universal constants, we create a communication system that transcends the biological and cultural differences that separate our species. But the real revelation comes when the alien begins transmitting what I can only describe as scientific poetry. They send elaborate descriptions of stellar fusion processes, but embedded within the technical data are patterns that suggest aesthetic appreciation for the beauty of nuclear physics. They describe the elegant dance of hydrogen atoms combining to form helium, the precise balance of gravitational collapse and radiation pressure that maintains stellar stability, the intricate electromagnetic fields that control plasma behavior in stellar cores. This discovery fundamentally changes my understanding of alien intelligence. I had been thinking of our communication partner as simply another scientist, a rational problem solver focused purely on practical goals. But these transmissions reveal something much more profound. This is a being capable of finding beauty in the fundamental workings of the universe, someone who appreciates the elegant mathematics underlying physical reality. They're not just studying Taeti to solve a practical problem, they're genuinely fascinated by the science itself. The implications of this realization extend far beyond our immediate communication challenges. If aesthetic appreciation for scientific beauty represents a universal characteristic of advanced intelligence, then the alien and I share something deeper than mere practical cooperation. We're both driven by curiosity about how the universe works, both capable of wonder at the intricate patterns that govern reality, both motivated by the pure joy of discovery that lies at the heart of all genuine scientific research. As our linguistic exchanges become more sophisticated, I begin to understand more about my communication partner's background and mission. Through careful questioning and patient explanation, I learn that they come from a planet they call Erid, orbiting a star roughly 40 light-years from Earth. Their sun shows the same astrophage infection that threatens our solar system, and they're facing a similar timeline for extinction if no solution can be found. But their approach to the crisis reveals fascinating differences in how their species thinks about scientific problems. Where humans organize Project Hail Mary as a massive international cooperation involving every nation on Earth, the Iridians apparently operate through smaller, more specialized research teams that maintain independence while sharing information freely. Their scientific culture seems to emphasize individual initiative and creative problem solving rather than large-scale coordinated efforts. This difference in approach becomes particularly interesting when we begin sharing detailed research data about astrophage. The Iridian scientist who eventually manages to convey that their name translates roughly to Rocky in our developing shared language has been conducting experiments that human researchers never attempted. Where we focused on understanding astrophage biology and reproduction, Rocky has been investigating the electromagnetic signatures associated with their energy consumption patterns. Rocky's research reveals crucial information that our Earth-based teams apparently missed. Astrophage organisms don't just consume stellar energy randomly, they show clear preferences for specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. This selectivity suggests that they've evolved specialized mechanisms for harvesting particular types of energy, much like how plants on Earth use chlorophyll to capture specific wavelengths of sunlight for photosynthesis. More importantly, Rocky has discovered that astrophage reproduction rates vary significantly based on the spectral characteristics of their host star. Stars with certain metallic compositions in their outer atmospheres show much slower astrophage growth, while others provide nearly ideal conditions for rapid reproduction. This finding offers the first real clue about why Taeti remains uninfected. Perhaps this star's unique chemical composition creates an environment where astrophage simply cannot establish a foothold. The collaborative nature of our research becomes essential for making progress on these complex questions. Rocky's electromagnetic analysis capabilities far exceed anything in my equipment inventory, but my biological analysis tools can examine astrophage cellular structure in ways that their technology cannot match. By combining our different instrumental approaches, we can conduct comprehensive studies that neither of us could accomplish independently. This cooperative research methodology teaches me something profound about the nature of scientific discovery. The most significant breakthroughs often emerge not from individual genius working in isolation, but from collaborative efforts that bring together different perspectives, methodologies, and areas of expertise. Rocky and I approach the same fundamental questions from completely different angles, and that diversity of thought proves invaluable for developing comprehensive understanding. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of our developing partnership is how naturally we fall into the rhythms of collaborative research. Despite evolving on different worlds and communicating through a makeshift scientific pigeon, we quickly establish efficient protocols for sharing data, coordinating experiments, and building upon each other's discoveries. The fundamental practices of scientific research, careful observation, systematic hypothesis testing, peer review of results, apparently transcend species boundaries. I find myself thinking about my human students and colleagues, wondering how they would react to discovering that scientific thinking represents a truly universal form of intelligence. The methods I used to teach physics to teenagers in a classroom back on Earth turn out to be applicable to communicating with an alien mind developed under a completely different star. The patience required for good teaching, the systematic approach to building understanding step by step, the willingness to repeat and clarify complex concepts, all of these pedagogical skills prove invaluable for interspecies scientific collaboration. Rocky demonstrates similar teaching instincts when explaining their research methodologies to me. They don't simply transmit raw data and expect me to understand its significance. Instead, they carefully guide me through their reasoning process, showing how each observation led to specific hypotheses, how they designed experiments to test those hypotheses, and how the results shape their current understanding of astrophage behavior. This systematic approach to knowledge sharing suggests that effective teaching might be another universal characteristic of advanced intelligence. Our communication becomes increasingly sophisticated as we develop shared vocabulary for complex scientific concepts. We create terms for different types of stellar radiation, various cellular structures observed in astrophage samples, mathematical relationships that describe population growth dynamics, and theoretical frameworks for understanding energy transfer in stellar plasma. Each new concept we successfully communicate expands our collaborative capability and brings us closer to solving the fundamental puzzle of Tau Cetus immunity. The process of building this shared scientific language teaches me something important about how knowledge develops in any context. Whether you're learning a new subject in school, mastering technical skills for your career, or trying to understand complex research findings, the foundation of understanding always consists of clearly defined concepts that can be combined in systematic ways to express more sophisticated ideas. The precision required for our interspecies communication forces both Rocky and me to think very carefully about what we actually know and how that knowledge relates to broader theoretical frameworks. As we prepare to begin direct collaborative experiments on Tau Cetus' unique properties, I reflect on how profoundly this encounter has changed my understanding of intelligence, communication, and scientific research. What began as a desperate solo mission to save humanity has evolved into something much more significant: the first scientific collaboration between two intelligent species, each bringing unique capabilities and perspectives to address challenges that threaten both our worlds. The work ahead of us will require every bit of scientific knowledge, creative problem-solving, and collaborative skill that both our species have developed. But for the first time since awakening alone among the stars, I feel genuinely optimistic about our chances for success. Science has given us not just the tools to analyze Tau Cetus mysteries, but the universal language needed to combine our efforts in ways that neither species could achieve alone. Chapter 7. The Secret of Tau Ceti. The discovery that changes everything begins with what appears to be a routine spectroscopic analysis of Tau Cetus' stellar atmosphere. Rocky and I have been working together for 3 weeks now, systematically mapping the chemical composition of different layers in the star's corona and photosphere. Our combined instruments provide unprecedented detail about the star's structure, but for days the data has shown exactly what we expected: a perfectly normal G-type star with chemical abundances similar to our own sun. Then Rocky transmits something that makes me double-check my translation protocols. The message, when I finally decode it properly, reads, "Grace human, observe anomalous biological signatures in stellar atmospheric layer 7.3 solar radii from surface. Data suggests presence of organized microstructures inconsistent with known stellar physics." My heart races as I access the sensor data Rocky is referencing. At first glance, the spectroscopic readings look like standard stellar atmosphere analysis: hydrogen and helium lines dominating the spectrum, with trace amounts of heavier elements creating the familiar absorption patterns we see in most stars. But when I examine the specific layer Rocky has identified, I notice something extraordinary that our automated analysis systems had categorized as instrumental noise. Embedded within the expected stellar plasma signatures are incredibly faint absorption lines that correspond to organic molecules. Not just any organic molecules, but complex carbon-based structures that could only exist if they were being actively maintained by some kind of biological process. The concentrations are vanishingly small, perhaps 1 part per billion in the stellar atmosphere, but they're definitely there, and they show the kind of systematic distribution patterns that suggest purposeful organization rather than random chemical reactions. Think about how remarkable this discovery really is. We're looking at a star's atmosphere where temperatures reach hundreds of thousands of degrees and radiation levels would instantly sterilize any Earth-based life form. Yet somehow, in this impossibly hostile environment, organized biological activity is taking place at a scale so vast it influences the chemical composition of an entire stellar atmosphere. The implications are staggering. Rocky's follow-up analysis provides even more startling information. The biological signatures aren't randomly distributed throughout the stellar atmosphere. They show clear geographical patterns that correspond to areas where astrophage would normally establish their initial colonies. More importantly, these regions show dramatically reduced levels of the specific electromagnetic frequencies that astrophage use for energy harvesting. Something is actively interfering with astrophage metabolism in precisely the wavelengths they require for survival and reproduction. I spend hours verifying these results with every analytical tool at my disposal. The mass spectrometer confirms the presence of complex organic compounds that shouldn't exist at stellar temperatures. The electromagnetic analysis reveals systematic interference patterns in the specific frequency ranges where astrophage are most active. Most convincingly, the spatial distribution of these phenomena exactly matches the zones where astrophage colonies would be most vulnerable during their early establishment phase. The picture that emerges from our combined data tells an incredible story. Tau Ceti hosts its own indigenous microorganisms that have evolved to thrive in the stellar environment, just like astrophage. But unlike the cosmic parasites that are slowly killing stars throughout the galaxy, these native organisms appear to function as a protective immune system for their host star. They've developed biological mechanisms that specifically target and disrupt astrophage colonies before they can establish sustainable populations. To understand how extraordinary this discovery is, consider the scale of the biological warfare we're observing. These stellar defenders operate in an environment where the pressure would crush any terrestrial material instantly, where radiation levels exceed anything found on planetary surfaces, and where the chemical conditions would dissolve most known biological molecules within microseconds. Yet they've not only survived in this environment, they've evolved sophisticated mechanisms for detecting and eliminating invasive organisms that threaten their stellar ecosystem. Rocky's excitement about this discovery comes through clearly in our communications, despite the limitations of our improvised scientific pidgin. They transmit elaborate descriptions of the defensive mechanisms we're observing, using mathematical models to illustrate how the native organisms identify astrophage colonies and disrupt their energy harvesting processes. The precision and elegance of these biological systems rival anything found in terrestrial immune responses, but operate at energy levels and environmental extremes that push the absolute limits of what we thought life could accomplish. The defensive strategy these organisms employ demonstrates remarkable sophistication. Rather than simply trying to destroy astrophage directly, which would be nearly impossible given the parasite's resilience in stellar environments, the defenders target their metabolic processes. They produce specific compounds that interfere with astrophage energy absorption, essentially starving the invaders by making it impossible for them to extract usable energy from stellar fusion reactions. Without access to their preferred energy sources, astrophage colonies cannot maintain the rapid reproduction rates necessary for establishing sustainable populations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this discovery is what it reveals about the evolution of life in extreme environments. The fact that two completely different forms of stellar life evolved independently, astrophage as parasites and the Tau Ceti organisms as defenders, suggests that stellar environments might support much more biological diversity than anyone previously imagined. We might be observing just the beginning of an entirely new understanding of where and how life can exist in the universe. The implications for our respective missions become immediately clear. If we can understand how these natural defenders work, we might be able to replicate their protective mechanisms in our own stellar systems. This wouldn't require the massive technological interventions that previous solution scenarios demanded. Instead, we could potentially introduce biological agents that would establish natural, self-sustaining defenses against astrophage infection. However, the challenges involved in implementing such a solution are staggering. First, we need to capture viable samples of these stellar defenders without damaging their delicate biological machinery. This requires developing collection techniques that can operate in stellar plasma while maintaining the precise environmental conditions these organisms require for survival. The engineering challenges alone represent advances in material science and robotics that push far beyond current technological capabilities. Second, we need to understand the biological mechanisms these organisms use to identify and disrupt astrophage colonies. This requires analyzing cellular structures and metabolic processes that operate at energy levels completely outside the range of normal biological research. Every technique we use for studying terrestrial life forms needs to be completely reimagined for organisms that exist in environments where the basic physics of chemistry operates under extreme conditions. Third, we need to determine whether these defensive organisms can survive and function in stellar environments different from Tau Ceti. Our respective suns have different chemical compositions, magnetic field structures, and energy output patterns that might affect how well transplanted defenders could establish themselves. We might need to develop modified versions of these organisms that are specifically adapted to the particular characteristics of our home stars. Rocky's analysis suggests an additional complication that makes our task even more challenging. The stellar defenders appear to exist in a delicate ecological balance with their host star. They've evolved over millions of years to work in harmony with Tau Cetus specific energy cycles, magnetic field fluctuations, and chemical evolution patterns. Disrupting this balance by removing significant populations for transport to other star systems could potentially damage Tau Cetus' natural defenses, leaving it vulnerable to future astrophage infections. This creates an ethical dimension to our mission that neither Rocky nor I had anticipated. Do we have the right to potentially compromise Tau Cetus' natural immunity in order to save our own worlds? How do we balance the urgent needs of our respective civilizations against the long-term ecological health of the one-star system that has successfully resisted the galactic astrophage pandemic? These questions don't have easy answers, but they demand careful consideration as we develop our research strategy. The practical challenges of studying these organisms require us to completely reimagine our research approaches. Traditional biological analysis techniques assume you can maintain samples in controlled laboratory conditions, but stellar defenders exist only in environments that would destroy conventional research equipment instantly. We need to develop new methods for conducting biochemical analysis in stellar plasma, understanding reproductive cycles that span stellar magnetic field variations, and observing predator-prey interactions that take place at temperatures measured in hundreds of thousands of degrees. Rocky's technological capabilities prove essential for making progress on these seemingly impossible research challenges. Their instruments can maintain stable operation much closer to the stellar surface than my equipment allows, providing access to the zones where defender-astrophage interactions actually take place. Meanwhile, my biological analysis tools offer capabilities for understanding cellular structure and genetic organization that complement Rocky's electromagnetic and chemical analysis strengths. Working together, we develop a research strategy that leverages both our technological capabilities and our different scientific traditions. Rocky's systematic electromagnetic-focused approach provides the broad-scale mapping necessary for understanding how defenders operate throughout Tau Cetus' atmosphere. My biological-focused methodology offers the detailed analysis needed for understanding the cellular and molecular mechanisms that make their defensive strategies possible. The collaboration required for this research teaches me something profound about how scientific discovery actually works when dealing with problems at the absolute frontier of knowledge. Neither Rocky nor I could make significant progress working independently. The challenges are simply too complex and multifaceted for any single perspective to address comprehensively. But together, our different approaches and capabilities create analytical power that exceeds what either of us could achieve alone. As we prepare for the detailed sampling and analysis work that lies ahead, I reflect on how dramatically our mission has evolved since my arrival at Tau Ceti. What began as a desperate search for clues about stellar immunity has become the discovery of an entirely new form of life that might provide the key to saving both our civilizations. The work ahead will be the most challenging research either of our species has ever attempted, but for the first time since leaving Earth, I believe we might actually succeed in bringing home a solution that can save our worlds. Chapter 8: Racing Against Time. The collection mission begins at dawn on what Rocky calls optimal stellar proximity day, the moment when Tau Cetus magnetic field variations create the most stable conditions for approaching the regions where stellar defenders are most active. After weeks of planning and equipment modification, we're finally ready to attempt something that pushes the absolute boundaries of what either of our technologies can accomplish, capturing living samples of organisms that exist in stellar plasma. The engineering challenge we face would have seemed impossible just months ago. We need to position our spacecraft close enough to Tau Cetus corona to collect defender organisms, maintain those samples in conditions that preserve their biological integrity, and transport them back to our research stations without destroying the delicate cellular mechanisms that make their defensive strategies possible. Every aspect of this operation requires pushing our life support systems, materials science, and robotics beyond their designed operational limits. Think about the scale of what we're attempting. Imagine trying to collect samples from the inside of a nuclear reactor while that reactor is operating at full power, except that reactor is 1,000,000 times hotter and more energetic than anything humans have ever built. The stellar defenders exist in an environment where temperatures reach hundreds of thousands of degrees, Magnetic fields fluctuate with the power of planetary-scale electrical storms, and radiation levels would sterilize any known life form in microseconds. Yet somehow we need to reach into that inferno and extract living organisms without damaging the biological processes that make them unique. Rocky's technological capabilities prove essential for developing collection methods that can operate under these extreme conditions. Their materials science has produced crystalline structures that remain stable at temperatures far beyond what human engineering can achieve, and their robotics can function in electromagnetic environments that would instantly disable any Earth-built equipment. Meanwhile, my biological containment systems offer precision environmental control that Rocky's technology lacks, creating the possibility of maintaining Defender samples in conditions that preserve their cellular integrity during transport. The collection strategy we develop represents a remarkable synthesis of two completely different technological traditions. Rocky's approach emphasizes robust engineering that can withstand extreme conditions through superior materials and energy-resistant design. My equipment focuses on precise environmental control and biological compatibility, creating conditions that support life rather than simply surviving harsh environments. Combining these approaches allows us to build collection systems that can both reach the stellar defenders and maintain them in viable condition once collected. Our first collection attempt teaches us humbling lessons about the complexity of what we're trying to accomplish. The approach trajectory calculations alone require unprecedented precision. We need to position our spacecraft at exactly the right distance from Tau Ceti's surface to access the defender populations without exposing our equipment to energy levels that would destroy it instantly. Rocky's navigation systems provide the computational power necessary for these calculations, but the margin for error is so small that even tiny miscalculations could result in mission failure or equipment loss. The actual collection process reveals the extraordinary sophistication of the stellar defender's biology. When our sampling probes reach the zones where defenders are most active, we discover that these organisms don't exist as isolated individuals floating randomly through stellar plasma. Instead, they form complex, organized communities that show clear evidence of cooperative behavior and coordinated defensive strategies. Groups of defenders work together to identify astrophage colonies, surround them with precisely coordinated formations, and deploy their metabolic disruption techniques with the kind of tactical precision that suggests genuine intelligence. Understanding this community structure fundamentally changes our approach to sample collection. We realize that capturing individual defenders in isolation might not preserve the biological mechanisms that make their defensive strategies effective. These organisms appear to rely on collective behavior and intercellular communication networks that only function when sufficient populations are maintained in appropriate social configurations. This means our collection efforts need to focus on preserving entire defender communities rather than simply gathering individual specimens. The technical challenges involved in maintaining viable defender communities during transport push both are life support technologies to their absolute limits. Stellar defenders require environmental conditions that exist nowhere else in the universe except in stellar coronas, temperatures measured in hundreds of thousands of degrees, pressures that would compress most materials into exotic states of matter, and electromagnetic field strengths that exceed anything found on planetary surfaces. Creating artificial environments that can sustain these conditions while remaining small enough for spacecraft transport represents advances in physics and engineering that expand the boundaries of what either of our species thought possible. Rocky's contributions to solving these containment challenges demonstrate the remarkable capabilities their civilization has developed for manipulating matter and energy under extreme conditions. They've created containment fields that use precisely controlled magnetic plasma confinement to maintain stellar temperature environments within volumes small enough to fit in our research laboratories. The energy requirements for these systems push our fusion power plants to maximum output, but they successfully create the environmental conditions necessary for defender survival. My biological monitoring systems provide the other essential component for maintaining viable defender populations during transport. While Rocky's technology can create the physical conditions defenders require, understanding whether those organisms remain healthy and functional requires continuous biological analysis that monitors cellular metabolism, community organization patterns, and defensive capability maintenance. The integration of these monitoring systems with Rocky's containment technology creates hybrid life support systems that represent genuinely new approaches to sustaining life in artificial environments. The first successful collection of a viable defender community marks a watershed moment in both our species' scientific history. We've not only discovered life forms that exist in stellar plasma, but we've developed the technological capabilities necessary for studying them in controlled laboratory conditions. The implications extend far beyond our immediate mission objectives. We've essentially opened an entirely new frontier for biological research by proving that organisms from the most extreme environments in the universe can be studied using advanced but achievable engineering methods. However, our success in collecting defender samples immediately presents us with new challenges that are equally complex and time-sensitive. We need to understand how these organisms work well enough to determine whether they can be adapted for protecting our home star systems, but we also need to develop reproduction and cultivation methods that can produce sufficient quantities for treating entire stellar atmospheres. The scale of biological production required for this application dwarfs anything either of our species has ever attempted. Consider the magnitude of the biological manufacturing challenge we face. Treating a star system's astrophage infection requires introducing defender populations large enough to establish sustainable colonies throughout the stellar atmosphere. We're talking about biological quantities measured in terms that boggle the mind, trillions upon trillions of individual organisms that must be produced under carefully controlled conditions that maintain their defensive capabilities. This represents biotechnology and biological manufacturing at scales that push far beyond anything either humans or Iridians have previously accomplished. Rocky's analysis of defender reproduction cycles reveals additional complications that make our timeline even more challenging. Stellar defenders reproduce using biological processes that are synchronized with their host star's magnetic field variations and energy output cycles. These reproductive cycles operate on timescales measured in stellar months rather than terrestrial days, which means that establishing breeding populations for large-scale cultivation requires careful coordination with astronomical phenomena that occur only at specific intervals. The time pressure we face becomes more acute as we receive updated communications from our respective homeworlds. My latest data package from Earth shows that astrophage infection rates in our Sun are accelerating faster than previous models predicted, probably due to improved environmental conditions that have developed as the parasites have established more extensive colonies. Rocky reports similar acceleration in the astrophage infection affecting Erid's star system, suggesting that both our civilizations are facing shortened timelines for implementing any protective measures we might develop. These accelerating infection rates force us to make difficult decisions about the scope and ambition of our research efforts. Under ideal circumstances, we would spend years conducting comprehensive studies of defender biology, developing multiple approaches for cultivation and deployment, and testing various strategies for adapting these organisms to different stellar environments. But our compressed timeline means we need to focus on developing one viable approach that can be implemented quickly rather than exploring all possible options thoroughly. The pressure of these timeline constraints teaches me something profound about how scientific research operates under crisis conditions. When facing genuine emergencies that threaten fundamental survival, the luxury of exhaustive investigation and comprehensive testing becomes impossible. Scientists must make decisions based on incomplete information, accept higher levels of risk than they would normally consider acceptable, and focus on solutions that can be implemented rapidly rather than approaches that might ultimately prove more elegant or reliable. Rocky and I spend countless hours developing contingency plans for various scenarios we might encounter as we work to understand defender biology and develop cultivation methods. We identify the critical experiments that must succeed for our mission to have any chance of success, create backup approaches for essential research objectives, and establish protocols for making rapid decisions when time constraints prevent thorough analysis of all available options. The collaborative nature of our research becomes even more essential as time pressure increases and the complexity of our challenges grows. Neither Rocky nor I could hope to solve all the biological, technological, and logistical problems we face working independently. But together, our different capabilities and approaches allow us to pursue multiple research directions simultaneously while maintaining the intellectual cross-checking that prevents critical errors under pressure. As we prepare for the most intensive phase of our research, attempting to understand defender biology well enough to reproduce their defensive mechanisms in other stellar systems, I reflect on how dramatically our mission has evolved since we first encountered each other in the emptiness around Taeti. What began as two separate, desperate searches for salvation has become the most ambitious biological research project either of our species has ever attempted. The work ahead will test every aspect of our scientific capabilities and collaborative skills, but for the first time since leaving Earth, I genuinely believe we might succeed in developing solutions that can save both our worlds from the cosmic threat that brought us together. Chapter 9: The Impossible Choice. The cultivation breakthrough comes after 18 days of relentless experimentation, when Rocky discovers that stellar defenders can reproduce in artificial environments if we recreate not just the physical conditions of stellar plasma, but also the complex electromagnetic rhythms that synchronize their biological cycles. The moment when our first defender colony successfully reproduces in controlled laboratory conditions represents one of the greatest achievements in either of our species' scientific history. But even as we celebrate this success, the cruel mathematics of our situation become undeniably clear. We have proven that stellar defenders can be cultivated artificially, but producing sufficient quantities to treat both our star systems requires resources and time that exceed what either of our missions can provide. The energy requirements alone for maintaining the massive cultivation facilities needed to breed defender populations at planetary scale would drain our spacecraft's fusion reactors within months. More critically, the biological production timelines we've calculated show that developing treatment-ready defender populations would take approximately 14 months under optimal conditions. I'm staring at these calculations on my workstation screen when the full implications hit me with devastating clarity. We have enough fuel and life support capacity for one spacecraft to make the return journey to either Earth or Erid, but not both. The defender cultivation process requires so much energy and materials that successfully developing a treatment for one star system will leave insufficient resources for saving the other. We've solved the scientific challenge, but the practical constraints of our situation force us into an impossible choice between two worlds. Think about the mathematical brutality of our predicament. Both Earth and Erid face extinction timelines that require implementation of defender-based treatments within specific windows of opportunity. Miss those deadlines, and astrophage infections will progress beyond the point where biological interventions can restore stellar output to life-sustaining levels. We have the knowledge necessary to save both civilizations, but the physical realities of interstellar travel and biological cultivation mean that we can only save one. Rocky's response to this realization demonstrates the profound character that has made our partnership so effective throughout this mission. When I transmit the resource analysis that proves we face this terrible choice, Rocky doesn't argue with the mathematics or propose desperate schemes to circumvent physical limitations. Instead, they calmly acknowledge the situation and immediately begin analyzing which civilization has the better chance of successfully implementing defender treatments if they receive our cultivation technology. The discussion that follows represents one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had, made even more challenging by the need to conduct it through our improvised scientific pigeon. Rocky systematically reviews the technological capabilities, resource availability, and implementation timelines that would affect each civilization's ability to scale up defender cultivation to planetary levels. Their analysis is methodical, objective, and heartbreakingly logical as they evaluate which world we should choose to save. Rocky's assessment reveals crucial differences between our civilizations that affect the probability of successful implementation. Erid's distributed scientific culture, with its emphasis on small, specialized research teams, might actually provide advantages for rapidly scaling biological cultivation technologies. Their society has extensive experience with biotechnology applications on planetary scales, having used biological approaches to terraform marginal environments on multiple worlds in their star system. They possess manufacturing capabilities specifically designed for producing biological agents in the massive quantities required for atmospheric modification. In contrast, Earth's approach to the astrophage crisis has emphasized massive international cooperation and resource coordination, but our biotechnology infrastructure focuses primarily on medical and agricultural applications rather than planetary-scale atmospheric modification. Scaling up defender cultivation to treat our sun's entire atmosphere would require building entirely new manufacturing facilities and developing production methodologies that don't currently exist in human technology. Rocky's analysis suggests that ARID has approximately a 70% probability of successfully implementing defender treatments if they receive our cultivation technology, while Earth's probability of success appears to be closer to 40%. The logical conclusion seems clear: we should prioritize returning to ARID with the treatment technology, maximizing the chances that at least one civilization survives the astrophage crisis. But as I consider Rocky's analysis, I realize that pure probability calculations don't capture the full complexity of the decision we face. There are ethical dimensions to this choice that transcend simple optimization of survival odds. Do I have the right to condemn my own species to extinction, even if another civilization has better prospects for survival? Can any rational analysis truly capture the value of human culture, art, literature, and scientific achievement that would be lost if Earth dies while ARID survives? Rocky seems to understand my emotional struggle with their logical assessment, even though our communication methods make it difficult to convey the full depth of feelings involved in contemplating the extinction of one's homeworld. They transmit what I interpret as expressions of sympathy and understanding, acknowledging that the decision we face involves factors that can't be reduced to simple mathematical optimization. The practical aspects of our situation become even more complex when we consider the implementation challenges that both civilizations would face. Even with our cultivation technology, successfully treating stellar astrophage infections requires precise coordination between multiple scientific disciplines, massive resource commitments, and flawless execution of biological interventions on scales that neither civilization has ever attempted. The margin for error is essentially zero. Any significant mistakes during implementation would result in mission failure and civilizational extinction. This realization leads me to consider an alternative approach that Rocky's probability analysis hadn't fully explored. Instead of choosing which civilization to save based purely on implementation probabilities, perhaps we should consider which civilization might be better positioned to eventually develop solutions for treating other astrophage-infected star systems throughout the galaxy. The cosmic scale of the astrophage pandemic means that our discovery of stellar defenders, ASAM, represents knowledge that could potentially save countless civilizations beyond just our own. From this broader perspective, the question becomes which civilization is more likely to develop the technological capabilities and social organization necessary for mounting galaxy-scale rescue missions. Earth's experience with international cooperation and large-scale coordination might provide advantages for organizing interstellar assistance programs, while ARID's distributed approach to scientific research might prove more effective for developing advanced interstellar technologies and biological applications. Rocky's response to this broader analysis reveals something remarkable about their character and the values of their civilization. Rather than advocating for their own world survival based on superior implementation probabilities, they begin developing detailed plans for how whichever civilization survives could eventually mount rescue missions to save the other. Their focus shifts from optimizing their own survival to ensuring that our scientific discoveries ultimately benefit both civilizations, even if one must wait longer for salvation. This perspective transforms our discussion from a zero-sum choice between competing civilizations into a collaborative planning process for maximizing long-term survival prospects for both species. We begin developing scenarios where the civilization that receives immediate treatment would use their survival time to develop more advanced cultivation technologies, more efficient interstellar transportation methods, and more effective approaches to scaling biological interventions across multiple star systems. The technical feasibility of eventual rescue missions depends on advances in interstellar travel technology that neither civilization currently possesses. The fusion propulsion systems that brought us to Taeti represent the absolute pinnacle of our respective technological capabilities, but they're still inadequate for mounting multiple interstellar missions within the compressed timelines that galactic astrophage infections would require. Developing transportation technologies capable of supporting galaxy-scale rescue operations would require scientific breakthroughs that push far beyond current understanding of physics and engineering. However, the civilization that survives the immediate crisis would have powerful motivations for developing such capabilities. Knowing that other intelligent species face extinction from the same threat would provide compelling reasons for investing enormous resources in advanced space travel research. The moral obligation to assist other threatened civilizations would complement practical concerns about preventing astrophage from spreading to additional star systems, creating strong incentives for rapid technological development. As Rocky and I work through various scenarios for long-term survival strategies, I begin to understand that our choice isn't really between saving Earth or Erid. It's between different pathways for ensuring that both civilizations ultimately survive, even if one faces a longer period of existential threat before receiving assistance. This reframing doesn't make the decision easier, but it provides a moral framework that preserves hope for both worlds while acknowledging the practical constraints we face. The personal dimension of this choice remains agonizing despite our attempts to approach it through rational analysis. Rocky will be returning to their homeworld regardless of which civilization we choose to prioritize, but I face the possibility of spending the rest of my life knowing that I chose to let my own species die while saving another. The weight of that responsibility is almost unbearable, yet refusing to make any choice would guarantee the extinction of both civilizations. Rocky's willingness to accept whatever decision we make demonstrates the profound friendship that has developed between us despite our vastly different origins. They understand that I must ultimately choose between my own species and theirs, yet they continue working with complete dedication to ensure that our mission succeeds regardless of which path we select. Their commitment to our shared scientific goals transcends the personal implications of our choice, reflecting a level of intellectual and moral maturity that I find both inspiring and humbling. As we prepare for the final phase of our mission, implementing whichever decision we make about civilization priorities, I reflect on how profoundly this experience has changed my understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and moral responsibility on cosmic scales. The choice we face represents the ultimate test of whether rational beings can make decisions that transcend tribal loyalties while still honoring the emotional bonds that make life meaningful. Tomorrow we will begin the practical implementation of whichever path we choose, but tonight I struggle with the most difficult decision any human has ever faced. Chapter 10: Sacrifice and Hope. The solution comes to me in the middle of what should have been a routine systems check, when I notice an anomaly in our fuel consumption calculations that changes everything about our impossible choice. Rocky and I have been so focused on the energy requirements for Defender cultivation that we overlooked a crucial variable in our return journey analysis. The gravitational dynamics of the Tau Ceti system, combined with the orbital mechanics of our current position, create a window of opportunity that neither of us had considered until now. Let me walk you through the physics that transforms our desperate situation into something that might actually work. When spacecraft travel between star systems, they don't move in straight lines like cars driving between cities. Instead, they follow complex trajectories that take advantage of gravitational fields to minimize fuel consumption and maximize efficiency. Think of it like a cosmic version of whitewater rafting, where skilled navigators use the river's current to reach their destination with minimal effort. The breakthrough insight involves something called gravitational assist trajectories, where spacecraft use the gravitational pull of massive objects to change direction and speed without consuming additional fuel. By carefully timing our departure from Tau Ceti and plotting a trajectory that takes advantage of gravitational interactions with the system's largest planets, we can actually split our cargo between two separate missions while requiring only marginally more fuel than a single return journey would demand. Here's how the orbital mechanics work in practice. Instead of launching both our spacecraft directly toward our respective home systems, we can use Tau Ceti's gravitational field to slingshot one vessel toward Earth while the other heads toward Erid, with each trajectory optimized to take advantage of planetary alignments that occur only during specific time windows. The energy cost for this dual trajectory approach exceeds our original calculations by approximately 15%, which falls within the safety margins we built into our mission planning. Rocky's excitement about this discovery comes through clearly in their transmissions, despite the limitations of our scientific pigeon. They immediately begin refining the trajectory calculations, using their superior navigation systems to identify the precise launch windows and orbital mechanics that would make dual missions possible. Their analysis confirms that we can indeed save both civilizations, but only if we execute the mission with precision that allows virtually no margin for error. The practical implementation of this dual mission approach requires completely reorganizing our research priorities and resource allocation strategies. Instead of cultivating massive defender populations for treating entire stellar atmospheres, we need to focus on producing smaller quantities of defenders, along with comprehensive cultivation technology that each civilization can use to scale up production after we arrive. This shifts our mission from delivering complete solutions to providing the knowledge and biological foundation necessary for each world to develop its own salvation. Think about how this changes the fundamental nature of what we're trying to accomplish. Rather than functioning as cosmic paramedics who arrive with ready-made treatments for the astrophage crisis, we become teachers and technology transfer specialists who provide the tools and knowledge that enable each civilization to heal itself. This approach requires much deeper understanding of defender biology and cultivation techniques, but it dramatically reduces the resource requirements for biological production during our mission. The educational and technology transfer challenges this approach creates are formidable, but they play directly to both our strengths as scientific researchers and communicators. I remember my years teaching high school physics, where success depended not just on understanding the material myself, but on developing clear explanations, effective demonstrations, and systematic approaches that enabled students to master complex concepts independently. Those same pedagogical skills become essential for ensuring that both Earth and Arid can successfully implement defender cultivation programs without ongoing assistance from us. Rocky's distributed scientific culture provides complementary advantages for this technology transfer mission. Their experience with small, specialized research teams means they understand how to package complex technical knowledge in ways that can be adapted and implemented by groups with different technological capabilities and resource constraints. Together, we can develop comprehensive training materials, detailed cultivation protocols, and robust quality control systems that give both civilizations the best possible chances for successful implementation. The timeline for this revised mission approach is even more demanding than our original plans, but it's achievable if we maintain absolute focus and coordination. We have approximately 6 weeks to complete our research on defender biology, develop comprehensive cultivation technologies, produce starter populations for both civilizations, and prepare our spacecraft for the complex orbital mechanics required for dual return trajectories. Every day of delay reduces our chances of hitting the precise launch windows that make this approach possible. But as we begin implementing this new mission plan, I discover something that fundamentally changes my understanding of stellar defenders and their potential applications. The detailed biological analysis we conduct reveals that defenders aren't just immune system organisms that protect their host star from astrophage infection. They're actually ecosystem engineers that actively optimize stellar conditions for supporting life throughout their solar system. Here's what makes this discovery so remarkable. Stellar defenders don't simply eliminate astrophage colonies and then become dormant until the next invasion occurs. Instead, they continuously monitor and adjust their star's energy output, magnetic field stability, and spectral characteristics to maintain optimal conditions for planetary life support. They function like cosmic gardeners, actively managing stellar health rather than just defending against specific threats. This deeper understanding of defender biology reveals why Tau Ceti has remained not just free of astrophage infection, but also unusually stable in its energy output over millions of years. The defender colonies that protect this star have been actively optimizing its performance for geological timescales, creating the kind of stable, life-supporting stellar environment that most star systems can only maintain for much shorter periods. The implications for our respective civilizations extend far beyond simply treating the immediate astrophage crisis. If we can successfully introduce defender populations to our home star systems, we're not just eliminating a cosmic threat, we're potentially creating stellar environments that will remain stable and life-supporting for millions of years longer than would otherwise be possible. This transforms our mission from crisis response to long-term civilizational infrastructure development. Rocky's analysis of their star system's long-term prospects reveals additional benefits that Defender introduction might provide. Arid Sun shows early signs of the gradual brightening that occurs as stars age and their nuclear fusion processes slowly change over cosmic time. Without intervention, this stellar evolution would eventually make their planet too hot for life, forcing their civilization to either migrate to other worlds or develop massive technological interventions to maintain habitable conditions. Defender populations could potentially slow or even reverse these aging processes, extending their sun's life-supporting phase by millions of years. Similar benefits could apply to Earth's long-term future. Our sun will eventually brighten enough to boil away Earth's oceans, but that catastrophe lies so far in the future that most people never consider it relevant to current decision-making. However, if we successfully introduce defender populations, future generations of humans might inherit a solar system with stellar stability that extends far beyond what natural stellar evolution would provide. We're not just saving our civilizations from immediate extinction, we're potentially giving them cosmic-scale longevity that transforms their entire evolutionary trajectory. The personal dimension of our mission becomes even more meaningful when viewed from this expanded perspective. Rocky and I aren't just two individual scientists trying to prevent civilizational collapse. We're potentially the agents through which two intelligent species transition from vulnerable dependence on unstable stellar conditions to active partnership with cosmic ecosystem management systems that operate on timescales longer than the entire history of complex life on Earth. But even as we work toward this remarkable outcome, the practical challenges of executing our dual mission plan test every aspect of our scientific capabilities and collaborative relationship. The cultivation protocols we develop must work reliably across different technological platforms and resource availability scenarios. The biological training materials we create must be comprehensible to scientists who have no previous experience with stellar environment life forms. The starter populations we produce must remain viable during interstellar transport while retaining their essential biological capabilities. Rocky's systematic approach to these challenges demonstrates the remarkable intellectual flexibility that has made our partnership so productive. They don't just adapt their own research methods to accommodate the requirements of technology transfer, they actively work to understand human scientific traditions and educational approaches, developing hybrid methodologies that combine the best aspects of both our civilization's research cultures. The friendship that has developed between us during these intensive weeks of collaboration provides emotional sustenance that enables us to function effectively despite the enormous pressure we face. We're not just colleagues working on a shared scientific project, we've become genuine partners who trust each other completely and share a commitment to outcomes that transcend our individual or even species-specific interests. As we approach the final phase of our mission preparation, I reflect on how profoundly this experience has changed my understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and responsibility on cosmic scales. What began as a desperate solo mission to save humanity has evolved into something much more significant, the first successful collaboration between two intelligent species that creates benefits extending far beyond the immediate crisis that brought us together. The launch windows for our dual return trajectories open in 12 days and will be ready. Both Earth and Arid will receive not just the knowledge necessary to eliminate their astrophage infections, but the biological tools and technical understanding needed to establish long-term partnerships with cosmic ecosystem management systems. We're returning home not just as survivors of a crisis, but as ambassadors of a new relationship between intelligence and the universe that could transform how both our species think about their place in the cosmic order. The stars no longer seem like distant, untouchable lights in the darkness. They've become potential partners in the greatest collaboration either of our civilizations has ever imagined.